Welcome to Better Health Guy Blogcasts, empowering your better health. And now, here's Scott, your Better Health Guy. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Nothing in today's discussion is meant to serve as medical advice or as information to facilitate self-treatment. As always, please discuss any potential health-related decisions with your own personal medical authority.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 87 of the Better Health Guy blogcast series. Today's guest is Dr. Terry Wahls, and the topic of the show is the Wahls Protocol. Dr. Terry Wahls is an Institute for Functional Medicine certified practitioner and a clinical professor of medicine at the University of Iowa, where she conducts clinical trials. In 2018, she was awarded the Institute for Functional Medicine's Linus Pauling Award for her contributions in research, clinical care, and patient advocacy. She is also a patient with secondary progressive multiple sclerosis, which confined her to a tilt-recline wheelchair for 4 years. Dr. Wahls restored her health using a diet and lifestyle program she designed specifically for her brain, and now pedals her bike to work each day. She is the author of the Wahls Protocol, How I Beat Progressive MS Using Paleo Principles and Functional Medicine, the Wahls Protocol, A Radical New Way to Treat All Chronic Autoimmune Conditions Using Paleo Principles, and the cookbook, The Wahls Protocol Cooking for Life, the Revolutionary Modern Paleo Plan to Treat All Chronic Autoimmune Conditions. She conducts clinical trials that test the effect of nutrition and lifestyle interventions to treat MS and other progressive health problems. She teaches the public and medical community about the healing power of the paleo diet and therapeutic lifestyle changes that restore health and vitality. She hosts a Wahls Protocol Seminar every August where anyone can learn how to implement the protocol with ease and success. And now, my interview with Dr. Terry Wahls. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Dr. Wahls at the Integrative Medicine for Mental Health Conference in Dallas a few months ago and was really excited about the opportunity to have her on the show today. She graciously accepted the opportunity to be on the podcast, and here we are. Thanks so much, Dr. Wahls, for being here today.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about your story. How did you end up in a wheelchair from secondary progressive MS? Was there a specific trigger or stress in your life at the time that your health started to decline? And then what helped you make that connection to diet playing such a key role?
Boy, it's certainly a big journey. Before I became a physician, I was an athlete, competed nationally in Taekwondo, and was a bronze medalist at the Pan American Trials in 1978. Then entered medical school. During medical school, I started having episodes of electrical discomfort in my face, which over the years would get more intense, and finally very electrical. And finally saw a neurologist who prescribed Tegretol. I had a drug rash, had to stop that, tried a variety of other drugs, none of which worked. And it was apparent that these episodes would come on sort of randomly, cluster for a few days, then to a few weeks, and they were getting more severe, more frequent. Then I had an episode of weakness involving, the next episode was visual dimming that occurred while I was out rollerblading. Big workup, no clear etiology. Then 13 years later, I started stumbling and again had a big workup, MRIs of my brain, my spinal cord, spinal tap, nerve conduction velocities, and the diagnosis of relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis was made, and that my episode of visual dimming 13 years earlier was probably optic neuritis. Now at that time, like many physicians, I dive into the literature, and what I see is pretty disturbing that within 10 years of diagnosis, half will be unable to work due to severe fatigue, and a third will need a cane, walker, or wheelchair. And the majority will convert to the secondary progressive form of the illness where disability accrues. So I want to treat my disease aggressively. I look for who's doing the most clinical research in the Midwest, which is the Cleveland Clinic. I go see them, to see their best people, take the newest drugs. And within 3 years, I am in the wheelchair. I've converted to secondary progressive MS, and I'm taking mitoxantrone, a form of chemotherapy. I continue to decline. Then I'm put on Tysabri, the new biologic drug. Thrilled to take it, but I continue to decline. Then I'm put on Celcept, a different immune suppressant. And that's 4 years into my diagnosis. And it's very apparent to me that the best medicine from the best people is not stopping my march towards a bedridden, possibly demented, possibly uncontrolled pain sort of life. And so I start reading more and more. And my physicians at the Cleveland Clinic had told me about the work of Lauren Cordain. So years earlier, I had, after 20 years of being a vegetarian, got back to eating meat, but I'd continued to decline. I'm now reading again, and I start making the observation that there's really not much in the MS world, but there's a bunch of vitamin and supplement studies in Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's, Huntington's disease. And I decide that mitochondria are the driver of neurodegeneration and are probably the driver of disability in MS. So I work on supplements for my mitochondria. My fatigue is somewhat less, and I'm grateful. The speed of my decline slows. I am grateful. I'm still declining. I discovered the Institute for Functional Medicine. I take their course on neuroprotection, have a longer list of supplements. And then I have a really big aha moment, like, what if I redesign my paleo diet to maximize the nutrients that I was taking in pill form? And so I do that, and it's startling how quickly things change. My fatigue is gone, my brain fog is gone, my pain is gone. 3 months later, I'm beginning to walk with a cane. 6 months later, I'm walking without a cane. 9 months later, I'm on my bike pedaling around the block for the first time in 6 years. And 12 months later, I'm able to do a 20-mile bike ride.
Wow.
So I am really thinking very differently about disease and health, and I'm beginning to practice medicine very differently because I'm much more interested in diet and lifestyle, and I'm teaching patients to focus on diet and lifestyle.
Do you think that if you had been eating the diet then that you eat today, that you may never have developed symptoms of MS at all?
Oh, probably.
Yeah.
But I didn't know. And like everyone else, I'm vulnerable to sugar, to white flour, to cheese. It has all those caseomorphs, gluteomorphs, which are so yummy. And so, of course, I became addicted, like most of America. It's yummy, delicious, it's everywhere.
So for those people that are not familiar with the diet that you recommend with the Wahls Protocol, what are the key components of your dietary plan? Is it more fruits and vegetables? I know you have a 3-3-3 plan, so tell us about that.
Sure. So there's really two big factors. There's the foods you remove, the excluded foods, then the foods you recommend. And what I remind everyone is that I was a vegetarian. I went on a paleo diet. I gave up all grain, all legumes, all dairy. So I did all the exclusions, and I still went downhill. So the next year I needed the wheelchair. So just removing the food was not enough. I really had to ramp up the correct food. And so this is sort of like a Mediterranean diet in the sense that lots and lots of fruits and vegetables. 3 cups of deeply rich green leafy vegetables. Kale, collards, spinach, romaine, parsley, etc. 3 cups of cabbage family, onion family, mushroom family vegetables, very rich in sulfur. 3 cups of deeply pigmented stuff, beets, carrots, berries, peppers, tomatoes. Then a protein source, and I have strategies for the people who are vegetarian for their spiritual and religious beliefs. I have guidance for them. If you're a meat eater, I want people to have 6 to 12 ounces of meat, so that's 2 palm-sized servings of meat. And then I want to have plenty of fats, healthy fats, avocados, olive oil, hemp oil, flax oil, cold. If you're going to cook with fat, then it should be saturated fat. And I encourage fermented foods, seaweed, and we can get into a little more nuance there.
So let's talk about each of those 3 groups, the greens, the colors, and the sulfur, and why each of them is important. So what is it nutritionally that they're providing us, and then what are some of the specific things in the body that they're supporting? So let's start with maybe with the greens.
So the greens, great source of vitamin K. Also a great source of carotenoids, a whole host of chlorophyll, pigmented-related pigments. And a great source of magnesium, because magnesium is a central ion in chlorophyll, like iron is in hemoglobin. So a lot of great nutrition, good source of folate, good source of vitamin C. Now, if you look at the vitamin K, the vitamin K1 is metabolized to vitamin K2, MK7 by our gut bacteria. And then our ileum will uptake that vitamin K2, MK7, transport it to our liver, which will metabolize it further to vitamin K2, MK4, which will then, in our bloodstream, help absorb the calcium out of the heart valves, out of the blood vessel walls, and in the brain is active in allowing us to make myelin. Very, very important. And there is now some evidence that the vitamin K2, MK4 helps stimulates the oligodendrocyte precursor cells, which are the stem cells that are involved in making the cells that repair myelin, which is the insulation on the wiring between brain cells. And as somebody with MS, I want my myelin to get repaired. So having plenty of vitamin K, so I could get down to the K2, MK4, very, very important. And for many people with MS, we have a lot of spasticity, stiffness in our muscles. Having more magnesium, very, very helpful.
So we're talking about MS, but it sounds like the same recommendations that you have would be or could be helpful for people dealing with any chronic neurological disease. Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. So if you want to maintain brain health, slow down aging, lower your risk of Alzheimer's, and also the depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, in all of those you see evidence for mitochondrial strain and excessive inappropriate inflammation. And for that reason, having more stem cells to repair and maintain your brain, repair and maintain the myelin, very helpful. Whether you have a mental health problem, you're worried about your memory, you're worried about Parkinson's, you're worried about MS.
So the greens do many things for us, but the myelin support is one of the key things. How about the colors? What are they doing for us in your program?
So the colors are a really great marker for polyphenols. And if you look at some of the big meta-analyses where we're combining studies, there's a lovely study looking at fruits and vegetables and all-cause mortality. Looked at about 850,000 lives. And what they saw is the more fruits and vegetables that you consumed every day, the lower the risk of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. So vegetables, great for overall health. Pigmented vegetables, great for overall health. Pigmented vegetables and berries, blueberries, purple grapes. In several studies, and these are even fairly brief studies, 16 weeks, 24 weeks, that have used a cup of equivalent blueberry powder versus placebo in people with cognitive decline using neuropsychological testing. In 16 weeks or 24 weeks, could have clinically meaningful and statistically meaningful differences in thinking ability. A cup of blueberries, like how easy is that to achieve? So for that reason, I want people to have 3 cups of deeply pigmented fruits, vegetables every day.
And the colored fruits and vegetables also play a role in supporting the mitochondria that you just talked about as well, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So all of those antioxidants help quench some of the oxidative stress that occurs as the mitochondria do their job of making ATP. And having the additional antioxidants around are very protective.
So we've talked about the greens and the colors. How about the sulfur?
So as the cabbage family, all of those vegetables have a lot of organic sulfur in them in a variety of forms. All of these foods have been shown to induce phase 1 and phase 2 enzymes that are involved in detoxification, which is helpful for us. In addition, they will increase the intracellular production of glutathione, which is a potent antioxidant in our cells, and is very important for the production of gamma-aminobutyric acid, which is a calming neurotransmitter. Very, very helpful.
So that's the GABA side for people listening. So if you have excess glutamate, you want to have that balance with the GABA. So consuming the sulfur portion of this diet approach helps to increase GABA as well, improving neurotransmitters. Talk to us a little bit about mushrooms. My understanding is that mushrooms actually fall into this sulfur category as well. So why are mushrooms such a key part of your program?
So mushrooms do a couple things. First, on the immune system, they stimulate the natural killer cells. And the natural killer cells can prime both the innate immune cell function. That's the cell function that protects me in the first 72 hours I'm exposed to a bacterial infection. And they prime the adaptive immune cells. And those are the cells that make the antibodies that will show up about 2 weeks after exposure to an infection. So they're great at getting my immune cells to be more vigorous in my protection. And as you know, our brains and our bodies are nowhere near as sterile as we used to think. The reason we are healthy is that our immune cells are able to keep the viral infections under control and keep the slow, relatively dormant bacterial infections under control. So that's one role they have, very, very important. Another role, particularly the lion's mane mushroom, at least in the in vitro studies, has been shown to increase nerve growth factors and brain-derived neurotrophic factors, which are important hormones to stimulate building synapses and stimulate repair of brain cells. So I personally like to have a teaspoon of lion's mane powder every morning and every evening, along with another teaspoon of another mushroom blend in addition. So I have lots of mushrooms in my protocol because of the tremendous health benefits.
So this is one where we can get it from some foods, but supplementing the additional lion's mane potentially is something for people to explore, specifically around increasing some of these growth factors like BDNF, or the brain-derived neurotrophic factor that you talked about, that can be helpful in dementia, Alzheimer's, all kinds of brain-related conditions, right?
Correct. Now, having said that, and I love my mushrooms, the most powerful thing you can do is learn and be physically active. You know, so I also do a physical workout every day, and I do cognitive training probably 2 to 4 times a week. So there are many strategies for making sure that we have plenty of nerve growth factors. Supplements should be part of it, but using your body and using your brain should also be a vital part of your strategy to stimulate your nerve growth factors.
How important, from your perspective, is consuming these foods, but that these foods are organically sourced?
Well, for years I worked at the VA, which is the Veterans Affairs hospital system. The people that I would see in my lifestyle clinic or in the primary care clinic or in the traumatic brain injury clinic often were living on food stamps, on disability income, and they had severe financial constraints. So I would teach them these concepts, and we'd teach them how to cook. These folks were often hunting, fishing, or had friends who could hunt and fish if they were too disabled. And so when people would first start working with me, they're getting canned vegetables, they're getting frozen vegetables, they're eating conventionally grown food. And as they got more comfortable with what I was talking about, they would begin to prioritize what to get organically using the Clean 15, the Dirty Dozen. And they would begin to learn how they could get more of their food organically. So my advice to folks is, do what you can given your financial and social circumstances and the reality of your life. What you clearly need to do, though, is to begin to cook at home. If you just get processed boxed foods, you're going to get a lot of things that are not good for you in terms of the food additives, the emulsifiers that are going to disrupt your microbiome, add to the leaky gut. And so clearly, you have to start cooking at home. You will not become well eating someone else's food.
For those people listening, the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15 that Dr. Wahls referred to, you can get details on that from ewg.org, the Environmental Working Group, which has really nice lists of which foods you really should invest the extra money being organic if you can do that, and which ones are probably okay to not be as strictly organic. Let's talk a little bit about methylation. There's so much focus on the role of MTHFR in terms of detoxification. I know Ben Lynch talks about the fact that you can use these leafy greens to provide the nutrients, the B vitamins and the folate that are needed to support methylation. So is that one of the things that your diet is looking at, is supporting the methylation and detox piece using the greens?
Absolutely. When people, we have this immense diversity in terms of all of the SNPs and the random mutations that occur that make our enzymes for running the chemistry of life less efficient or more efficient, and either provide a advantage for reproduction or a disadvantage for reproductive success. But the most significant factor, so we have say about 25,000 genes, but our bacteria have about 9 million genes. And so we spend a lot of time being really fixated on my SNPs and what happens in my genome. I think the much bigger impact is what's happening in my bacterial genome, and am I eating a diet diverse enough to have maximal diversity in my bacterial genome that will help me run the chemistry of life. And so I spend a lot of time telling people that the goal is to have 200 different plant species that you consume in a year. And that's a lot of work, even for me, to get 200 different plant species in a year. So, that means if I'm at the grocery store and there's something I haven't seen before, like, by God, I'm going to get that because I'm working on my 200 different plant species.
I've seen the pictures of your dinner plates on Facebook many times. And I definitely agree. I think the focus just on the genetics, really the focus should be on the epigenetics, or those things that influence our gene expression. I don't think that just because someone has MTHFR that necessarily is significant. But doing something like the diet that you promote, the program that you've put together, is epigenetically influencing our gene expression. And so even if we have the potential for something to go wrong through diet, stress reduction, and other things, we can keep those genes from expressing in a way that depletes our health.
Absolutely. The other thing I would throw in there is that when I was at the VA, I couldn't do any of this fancy testing, the SNPs or the advanced testing that the functional medicine docs can do, or that I can now do in private practice. I did fasting glucose, lipids, vitamin D, homocysteine, C-reactive protein, occasionally an insulin level. And I taught people to cook at home. And most of my folks ate conventional food. And I saw dramatic results. I mean, I have to admit, it was a real pain in the neck at the time. I was annoyed that I couldn't do all that fancy testing. But, now I am so immensely grateful, because I learned that the real power is teaching people how to manipulate the epigenetics through diet and lifestyle. And so people can make huge progress without spending lots of money on advanced testing, and they can make huge progress, but they do have to learn how to cook.
Is there kind of a target breakdown of proteins, carbs, and fats in the work that you do that you think is optimal?
Yeah. So, and my thinking about all of this has evolved over time. Our mitochondria and our cells are very flexible. We can survive on fat alone. That is, we can quit eating and survive on our own fat for quite a while. We can go through winter where the plants are gone, and we can survive on our fat and the animals that we encounter and hunt. And so that's a protein and fat diet. And we can live on carbs alone, as many people do here in America on carbs. And our mitochondria will preferentially burn glucose and sugar. So it gives us a lot of flexibility and has allowed us to survive many, many different kinds of ecologies throughout the world. Now, what do I think gives us the best health overall is probably having what we call hormesis, having periods of time where I'm burning preferentially fat. So a prolonged periodic fast is a very potent anti-aging strategy. However, and that will work for a while, and my body will get the signal that it's not a good time to reproduce, and I'll invest my resources in repairing the tissues. So it's a very healing strategy. However, if when I'm doing that, I'm consuming my protein as well as my fat, and I'm not maintaining my own structures very well. My brain's shrinking, my bone marrow's shrinking, my heart and liver are shrinking. So this is not a long-term strategy, but it's a very helpful pulsatile strategy. After that fast, I need a refeed. So I need to recharge all that protein. In the stem cells, see that protein and they are revitalizing. I am youthening. That's great for me. Then after I've sort of recharged everything, I want to go back to sort of a maintenance phase where I have sufficient protein, but not high protein. So if I have high protein, then I set off signals, mammalian targeted rapamycin, which increases my risk for benign and cancerous growths. So that's why I prefer sufficient, not high protein. And if I have a high carb and I have high insulin, an insulin-like growth factor, I'm going to have a higher rate of dementia, in neurodegeneration, and higher rates of cancer. So what I personally like to do is I like to have periodic fasts every month. I like to have sufficient protein, low glycemic, lower carb, and plenty of healthy fats. And after my fast, I go through a period of refeeding where I get to have more protein than usual, and I'll have I'm eating more. So I had my periodic fasts. I just had my week of refeed. It was fun. Now I'm back to my usual lower carb, lower protein, somewhat higher fat intake. So there's a pattern I go through every month, and I think that's ideal. But we can survive in a wide spectrum.
So you mentioned mammalian target of rapamycin. So we're talking here about mTOR and autophagy, and the fasting side of it, where you're talking about this cellular cleansing that occurs. That's the autophagy side. And essentially the idea that we should always target a specific amount of protein, carbs, and fats may not be ideal, that we need to have this kind of rhythm or cycle is what I'm hearing. And so I like the way you explained that. That was beautiful. Let's talk a little bit about, for those people that do not consume animal protein, what are the key protein sources that would substitute in those scenarios?
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about lectins. Lectins are a protein with a sugar side chain that causes an immune response. Our plants have created these compounds as a defense mechanism, and it is relatively toxic to insects. And it, depending on the person, you may have a more vigorous immune response or not to these lectins. And we have, over the millennia, made these lectins less troublesome by cooking them. If you cook them, grains and legumes, in a pressure cooker, you can denature them more effectively. So if I have a vegetarian, I have them follow a gluten-free grain, such as rice, and legumes, such as black beans. I cook them in a pressure cooker, so that decreases the lectin load considerably. And that's how I have them get their protein. Now, depending on their clinical circumstances, I might also take out the nightshades, and so I may personalize things a bit further. If they're going to have nuts and seeds, I'll have them soak the nuts overnight, rinse them, and put them in a smoothie, or put them back in the oven or in a dehydrator to get them crunchy again, because the soaking, the germination, also decreases the lectin load.
Is quinoa a reasonable protein source?
Well, so if you soak it or you cook it in a pressure cooker, yes. If you don't cook it in a pressure cooker, there'll still be a lot of lectins in it. And again, depending on the individual, that may or may not be a problem for you.
How different, I know a lot of people do a paleo diet. How different is your Wahls diet compared to a paleo diet?
So a lot of paleo eaters are very, very high in protein. They have a little bit of vegetable material. Some paleo eaters are no carbs, only meat. And what they're trading off, and what they seem to forget is, when you have a high protein diet, you still have a very high insulin level. You still have a very high mTOR level. And so there's still some negative health consequences as a result of that high protein diet. What I've done is, and people also may not have enough vitamin C, may not have enough vitamin of the B vitamins as well. Particularly, a lot of folks eat only muscle meat. They're not eating organ meat. They'll have a fair amount of acid load with that. So, yeah, the paleo diet, in my mind, doesn't give people enough guidance on how to have a maximally nutrient-dense diet. So I structured it very specifically to help people get nutrients that I thought were particularly important for brain function. And for your, and now, as I'm reading the literature, my diet's really great for your microbiome as well. It's sort of the marriage of the best world, the best part of the Mediterranean diet, and the best parts of the paleo diet.
You talked about the mushrooms. I know seaweed is another key component of your diet.
Yeah.
So what are some of the nutrients we get from seaweed, and what are those doing for us?
So I'd say the biggest thing that we're getting are minerals. Many of our land plants in land animals have become relatively mineral depleted because of our agricultural practices. We no longer rotate our crops. We test the soil and we'll put back nitrogen fertilizer. But the mineral content of our soils have been steadily depleting. And then on top of that, we're adding glyphosate or Roundup, which is a mineral chelator. So plants are being further starved for minerals, which means we are being starved for minerals. The mineral content of our food has been steadily declining. Minerals, magnesium, zinc, manganese, copper, these are cofactors for hundreds of different enzymes in our body. And if we are mineral depleted, then we're going to have difficulty with the effectiveness of those enzymes. And we're going to have many more neuropsychiatric symptoms. The seaweed is a great source of minerals, including iodine. And many of us are insufficient on our iodine intake. When physicians said stop using salt, we listened. We quit adding table salt. We still get too much salt because of all the added salt into our processed foods. And the processed food doesn't have iodized salt in it. It's regular salt. So I try to have people cook with seaweed. Most people find that it adds an incredible, delicious taste to their food, probably a reflection of their relative mineral deficiency status.
Let's talk a little bit. You mentioned earlier that there's specific foods that you like to take away, and then obviously then bringing in the highly nutritionally dense foods. What are some of the foods like gluten, cow dairy, those types of things that you think should always be taken away? And are those foods contributing to intestinal hyperpermeability and potentially being a trigger for autoimmunity, which we know is a factor in conditions like MS and other neurological conditions?
Well, certainly gluten can interact with zonulin, open up the zonulin gateway, and increasing the leakiness between the intestine and the blood lumen. Not everyone, but it's the vast majority of people with gluten sensitivity will be DQ2 or DQ8. That would account for, I think, about 95% of those who are found to be gluten sensitive. So it's not 100%, but certainly the vast majority. And gluten in the genetically susceptible person will increase the probability of developing intestinal permeability. And then if you're having these gates open, incompletely digested proteins will spill over into your bloodstream, where your immune cells will recognize these proteins as being too large and inappropriate and begin to develop antibodies to additional food proteins. Casein, which is the protein in dairy, again, depending on your genetics, may sometimes also contribute to this intestinal permeability problem as well. And if the casein protein gets into your bloodstream, you can have a abnormal reaction to it. I would also say, independent of the leakiness from the casein, milk has growth factors in it, which makes it very appropriate for infants and toddlers. Maybe okay up to adolescence, but after adolescence, why would I want to be consuming a food that has growth factors in it? Why would I want to increase my risk of benign and cancerous tumors? I don't. So I choose not to consume any dairy products. I choose to consume clarified butter if I'm going to have any dairy products. But otherwise, I don't care to have any increased risk for cancer or benign tumors.
Do you think it's important, considering the leaky gut or intestinal hyperpermeability, to do anything specific to treat that? Or do you think removing the offending agents and then putting in the nutritionally dense food over time will correct
so, in my VA practice, we'd remove the offending foods. We'd talk a lot about making soups and stews, and I'd have people get chicken feet and make chicken broths. If they were able to get a hoof, that's also very helpful. We talk about gelatin and collagen, and so I try to do this using food as well. And initially, people, it's fairly common that we would have to remove salads, remove the green smoothies, just have them use soups, stews, cooked foods for the first month or two while we're trying to get things healed up.
You talked about in MS that there's mitochondrial issues, there's myelin issues. You mentioned that supplementing lion's mane potentially was helpful beyond just the dietary pieces. What are some other areas where specific supplements may complement the diet? Are there some of those that are also critical?
So I really like to encourage everyone to get a vitamin D level. And I work with their primary care physician to increase their vitamin D intake to get their vitamin D level in the top half of the reference range. And if you're taking vitamin D, then you may have to take a vitamin K2 as well. Or you may be able to get enough through your greens. That's a conversation you can have with whoever is helping you with your vitamin D. You and I are both Caucasian. My ancestors were from Germany. And so during the summer, I can get a good tan and make lots of vitamin D. My African American friends and colleagues, during the summer, they tell me that they can get maybe a little bit darker, but only a tiny amount. And so they're never going to be able to make enough vitamin D, even if they are working in construction, shirtless all summer long. So it depends a lot here in Iowa. Now, maybe if they're in Florida or in Mexico, then sun would be okay for them. So you really have to look at where your ancestors are from, the pigment of your skin, and the latitude that you're living at to figure out how much vitamin D you're going to need. Maybe it's 1,000 units, maybe it's 10,000 units, maybe it's 15,000 units during the winter and less during the summer. It's a complicated interaction. I also like to have people check their homocysteine level, which is a fairly inexpensive look at how efficiently you're methylating. And then depending on the level, I may check a folate and a B12. And then I could sort out, can I give people sort of a generic inexpensive B vitamin, or do I need to use the methylated forms of the B vitamins and a more comprehensive methylation approach?
How about things like fish oil, CoQ10? Can we get enough of those from diet, or should those also potentially be supplement?
Well, ideally you have liver once or twice a week and heart once a week, and that will do very well. If you can have grass-fed meat, wild fish, some interesting studies that have shown when we eat the grass-fed foods, we do a better job of improving our red cell fatty acid ratios than when we take supplements. Again, it depends on the circumstance. If someone has a risk for concussions because they're an athlete or in their military, the military is prophylactically giving those folks fish oil now. to make it less likely that they're going to have problems. Is the woman pregnant, trying to conceive? Is she breastfeeding? Is a much larger drain on her brain and her omega-3 reservoirs. So those individuals in particular, I'd be very concerned about their omega-3 intake. And I might be measuring their red cell fatty acid ratios to be sure I'm getting them supplemented to achieve the ratios that I'm looking for.
In general, as a society, how deficient are we in those things that are needed to support optimal health and reduce mortality? So when we look at omega-3s and iodine and zinc and calcium and magnesium and whatnot, are most people deficient today?
Well, certainly our dietary intake is deficient. And if we look at our blood levels, now we don't really know what the optimal levels are. We know what the median level is. We know the standard deviation and the reference range. But what is the optimal level for function? There's a very interesting study by Bowman in geriatric folks. I think the mean age was 88. They did neuropsychological tests, brain MRIs, and blood values for lipids, vitamins, antioxidants, and then correlated. And they're able to predict 75% of brain volume and about 75% of thinking ability based on their blood values. We don't really know what the optimal B12 value is. We don't know what the optimum zinc level is. And if we look at today's society, we're chronically ill. So I would say the levels that are mean is not the optimal level.
I would agree. Yeah. When we come back to the sulfur-containing foods, I know there are people that feel as though they don't tolerate sulfur, oftentimes because they come back to some of their genetic SNPs, CBS, for example, things like that, that may or may not actually be as critical as what we sometimes think they are. But are there those people that are sensitive to garlic, onions, and so on? And then in those people, how do they get the 3 cups of sulfur-containing stuff?
Sure. So in my books, I always advise people, please work with your primary care physician as you implement these concepts, because this is the public health version, but your needs may be different. So in my clinics and in my clinical trials, I start with 3 cups greens, 3 cups color, 3 cups sulfur, and then I listen to how people are doing. We have some folks who come in and they discover that they can't get enough greens, and I'm one of those folks. I eat way more greens than 3 cups a day, folks, way more. And then we have some folks who tell us that if I have 3 cups of greens, I have diarrhea, but I seem to do okay with 1 cup. Like, okay, then 1 cup of greens, we'll make do with that. And then I have folks who may tell us that if I'm trying to have 3 cups of cabbage, I don't do it all well, but I can have 4 cloves of garlic a day. That seems to be okay. Like, okay, then listen deeply to how you're responding. Talk to your primary care physician and make adjustments. It's quite common, or not. Common's not the right word, but I do have folks in the sulfur category tell me that they didn't do well with the cabbage family, but they do very well with mushrooms. Or they don't do it all well with the onion family, but they seem to do fine with collards. And so they will find foods within that sulfur category that they can tolerate. But there certainly are some folks, 3 cups, they're not going to be able to do. It'll have to be somewhat less. But keep in mind, 2 cloves of garlic is the equivalent to 1 cup of cabbage.
Okay. Beautiful.
So you're not having to have 3 cups of garlic. That would be very intense, even for me.
Yes, that would be intense for me, and I love garlic. So we talking about 9 cups, primarily vegetables with some fruits. For some people, that sounds like a lot. So how can we get creative in terms of getting those things into our routine? Can we do smoothies? What are
Well,
some ways we can incorporate those?
if you take out the grains and legumes and the cheese, and you're eating 2 palm-sized servings of meat, and then the vegetables according to appetite, people often discover that the 9 cups is really not that much food, and they're happy to eat more. If you're a very petite lady, it might be 6 cups or 5 cups even. For myself, I generally eat 1 meal a day, so I have a huge salad, then I have my meat, and I have cooked vegetables, and then I've chased that with another salad, or perhaps a green smoothie on top of that. When I first started all this, and I was still eating 3 meals a day, I would have a smoothie in the morning and some leftover meat from the night before, and then I'd take my smoothie, I'd pour it in a thermos, and I'd bring that smoothie and some nuts, and that would be my lunch. And then I would have the cooked vegetables and a big salad and meat for the evening. So I really only had 1 cooked meal a day, and I would just have the leftover meat in the morning and a smoothie in the morning.
With the greens, how often do people need to be concerned about potential for oxalates?
So if you have a history of kidney stones, then yes, I'd be very concerned.
Okay.
If you're going to keep relatively dilute urine, so you're drinking a lot, I would not be as concerned. Or if you're having a mixture, so about 1/3 of your vegetables are cooked, 1/3 are fermented, and 1/3 are raw, I don't think you have to be concerned. If you are a raw vegan and everything is raw, then you're going to be at greater risk.
Okay, very good. The microbiome has been getting more and more attention over the past few years. You talked about how critical it is as well. So how is your diet supporting a shift of the microbiome in a health supporting direction and helping us then to reduce our disease factors, improve our mood, support our neurotransmitters? What are the key pieces of the diet that are supporting the microbiome?
Well, when we analyzed our diet, we have 80 grams of fiber in the diet. The typical American has about 15 grams of fiber. And so going from 15 grams to 80 grams is a huge change. Usually that change fertilizes more diversity in the microbiome. And that diversity, the greater the diversity, the more likely you are to have higher quality of life scores, less cardiovascular disease, less obesity, less autoimmunity, and lower rates of cancer. And probably also lower rates of anxiety and depression in there as well. Now, if you have a lot of whole grains, there's more insoluble fiber there. That's useful. But then you're getting a lot of lectins and leaky gut issues. So I'm not. My point of view is you get much more fiber going down the vegetable route. If you want to get more fiber still, you have your vegetables raw and fermented, you'll get more fiber. If you're having inflammatory bowel disease or having to deal with reducing the fiber because of the inflammatory bowel disease, then you're taking out the raw vegetables and we're just doing things cooked, soup, stews, and blenderized stews until everything is quiet.
My understanding as well is that the polyphenols play a role in supporting the microbiome, and that's certainly a key part of the reason you have the colored fruits and vegetables as well, correct?
There's a lot more. When we first started studying the microbiome, all we did was we did census taking. We counted who was there based on some DNA analyses. Now we're getting much more sophisticated, and we're looking at what are the metabolites that the bacteria are doing as they metabolize the food and each other's metabolites, and these smaller molecules get into our bloodstream. Because it's the bacteria, they're swapping genes all the time. So we don't, just because we know the name of the bacteria, we don't necessarily know what metabolites that bacteria is necessarily making. So where the research is going right now is the census taking plus the bacterial metabolites. Because the health benefits are accruing through the metabolites.
Are those metabolites something that can be measured in commercially available tests today, or is this still research?
Still research.
Okay.
And incredibly expensive.
Yeah. We talked about fiber, so let's talk a little bit about poop. So what should... Actually, this was the excitement of my day, is talking with Terry Wahls about poop. So what should healthy poop look like? What are some of the clues that we can get based on the color or consistency of our stool?
So we talk a lot about poop, and I ask everyone, are you pooping rocks, logs, slippery logs, snakes, pudding, or tea? If you have pudding or tea, then where you have to cut back on the fiber, you need cooked soups, stews. If you have snakes, that's perfect. If you have easily passed logs, those are okay. If you have dry logs or rocks, you need more fiber. And then we talk about more raw vegetables, green banana flour, chia flour, inulin, to try and increase the fiber content. Color, I'm not so concerned about. Obviously, if you're having blood, maroon, or black, you got to go see your doc. If things are white, you got to go see your doc. There's something going on there with lack of bile. If there's oil that's happening, then you have fat malabsorption. Again, you need to go see your doc.
So we have the Wahls diet, and then there's the Wahls protocol. So what are some other aspects of the Wahls protocol in supporting people from recovering from neurological conditions?
So we talk a lot about meaning, resilience, the hero's journey, life's purpose. I think that's very important. Social connectedness, stress reduction, exercise. Talk about electrostimulation of muscles. And then some detoxification strategies, and then try to give people some guidance as to the basic kind of primary care labs that I used at the VA so effectively. Tell people the labs that I used, the targets that I had, and strategies to go then collaborate with your personal primary care team to use those primary care type labs to monitor your success and make some further adjustments.
And is that level of detail covered in your books, or is that only available through your yearly course that you teach?
Well, it's in the books. You'll get much more of this in the yearly course that I teach.
Okay, beautiful. Let's talk about inflammation and pain. So when people incorporate the dietary shifts, do most people see reductions in pain and inflammation? And then I want to kind of connect this into this emerging topic of mast cell activation and histamine intolerance, which we see a lot in Lyme, people dealing with mold, various conditions, autism, for example. So sometimes things like fermented foods potentially can exacerbate that histamine side of it. So how do we decide when fermented foods, for example, might be a good thing versus a bad one?
In general, when I have people start with fermented food, I start with a very small dose. And if that small dose goes well, you can continue to gradually increase. If the small dose does not go well, that's a signal like, okay, I'm having a problem. I wonder if there is a yeast overgrowth, a candida overgrowth, and if the person would do well, Saccharomyces boulardii, and we need to put them more of a a ketogenic diet, periodic fast, time-restricted feeding program first.
And do most people then see some reduction in inflammation and pain, or do you recommend incorporating spices, curcumin, resveratrol, things like that
Well,
as well?
Pain was the number one reason that people came to see me at the VA. And nearly always people would come back in their month follow-up with significant improvements in energy, reductions in pain. So at that point, then we'd talk about whether or not if they wanted to add curcumin, resveratrol, caspation. It's sort of a two-edged sword. That's in the nightshade family. So it depends on the circumstances. Can I recommend the caspation or not?
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's talk a little more about, you mentioned the importance of stress reduction. So we have tools like meditation. I'm familiar with some of the limbic system retraining tools that can be helpful from supporting parasympathetic nervous system. There's tools like Patrick Porter's Brain Tap. Are there some specific modalities or approaches that you found in this stress reduction area that you've really gravitated to?
In the VA world, I end up talking to the vets that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of studies about the benefits of stress-reducing practices. And so we need to find something that will resonate with who they are as a person, so they will enjoy it enough that they can begin adding these practices. So for some, it's hunting and fishing. But for some of these guys, being around any kind of weaponry is way too stressful. They can't do that. So maybe it's gardening. Maybe we have some folks who took up creative writing. I have several artists, and that is their stress-reducing practice. I know the VA has been exploring using virtual reality as a way of retraining the limbic system as well. What to me I think is the most important is to talk with the individual and help them explore stress-reducing practices so that they can begin to find a practice that resonates with who they are. We can get a lot of fun gizmos, and I have some. They're way fun. But you could also just free write, do a gratitude journal, do meditation, go sit outside, garden, go lay barefoot in the grass. And these are also very effective.
Beautiful.
I'm very mindful from my time at the VA that I want to give people ways they can do this when they don't have money.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You don't need to spend lots of money to implement the Wahls Protocol. You can do this living on food stamps.
A listener asked the following question, which is, do you see people with progressive MS regularly leaving their wheelchairs when they follow your protocol? And does the protocol help the majority of those with MS?
Does it help the majority with MS? Yes. Have we had people with progressive MS adopt the protocol and work with physical therapy, doing the E-stim and working out, and eventually have significant clinically meaningful improvements in gait and motor function? Yes. If you want to improve motor function, you have to do motor work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If you're not going to do motor work, you're not going to get improvements in motor function. If you've had paralysis, we do have people who use functional electrical stimulation, using the electrodes to work out with an exercise cycle to maintain muscle mass and bone health and metabolic health. They're not going to be walking again. If you want to grow muscles that you can use, you have to cognitively train the muscle and that connection while you're doing the work. That's a big, big commitment of time to do that.
One of my listeners is a neurologist that's worked with about 3,000 MS patients. She does utilize your protocol to its full potential. She says that she
Yes.
finds that it definitely stabilizes their MS, but does not always improve or reverse their disease state, which is what we were just talking about. She says she incorporates the neuroelectric muscle stimulation as well. And she says, what more can be done to advance recovery and reversal in these patients? And then she ends with, she appreciates very much all that you do, Dr. Wahls.
That's very sweet. So one of the things that patients often don't appreciate is the difference between following the protocol 95% and following it 100%. So if you're having occasional cheat meals, you're still keeping the inflammatory cytokines up. You're still continuing to have damage. So step number one would be really understanding how thoroughly they're following this. I would do the gluten, glutenostics. There's a gluten test you can now do in the stool to see if the person still has gluten exposure. They may think they're following the diet really well, but may not have been meticulous in their food prep or in reading all the labels, or perhaps in their supplements, that they may have gluten exposure that they had not recognized. So I would do those two things. Then the next thing I would, so if you know they aren't having gluten, you know that they're following the diet 100%. The next thing I would do would be to go on the low lectin version of my diet, take out the nightshades, take out all grains, all legumes. So that's a much more restrictive diet. That's tough. Then if you're still not getting where you want to be, the next thing I would do would be add in stem cells. And some of the stem cells that I think are the least risky are the fat stem cells from a practitioner that is doing functional medicine along with the stem cells.
So
we've had
some
nice results that way.
Those are autologous stem cells then, right? So they're being taken out from the person and then
fat,
put
right?
Back in? Yeah. Okay.
So it's a stromal fraction from your own fat. Then you can grow that stromal fraction to get stem cells for reinfusion.
Beautiful.
So that'd be the sequence that I would investigate.
We know that MS is an autoimmune condition, and so some suggest that autoimmune conditions can be triggered by underlying chronic infections like Lyme disease, herpes viruses, all kinds of pathogens that we get exposed to. So how important is exploring the potential pathogen side of this in recovering from MS? And was that an area that you personally explored in your own recovery?
So let me comment about that. When we began to look at our brains using DNA probes, we were quite surprised to discover that there's a lot more foreign DNA in our brains than we'd ever appreciated. And I think 95% of adults have Epstein-Barr virus, but for the vast, and nearly all of us, certainly my age, have chickenpox and measles and mumps. But for all of us, the vast majority of us, these viruses are well controlled and quiet. Why do they become uncontrolled? And the biggest factors in all of that have to do with sleep, with stress, with diet quality. I don't think it's a matter of well, we can assume, or at least I assume, that when someone has an autoimmune problem, that those infectious elements are no longer optimally controlled. And I assume that they probably have a heavy burden of toxins, and that they are probably nutritionally severely depleted. So my advice is always, we want to address all these environmental factors as thoroughly as we can. I start first with diet, and then I ask people to work on their sleep patterns. in their stress reduction patterns and their exercise patterns. And we sort of negotiate with them in what sequence that they want to begin addressing these factors. Some people are ready to do everything all at once, but the vast majority can't. We have to sort of do things sequentially. And I remind people that in my journey, I'm still reading, evolving, tweaking, adjusting, and I plan on doing that another 60 years because I plan on living to 120 in good health, and I want to be playing with my grandchildren and my great-grands and my great-great-grands, and hopefully I'll continue to learn and refine and make adjustments to my dietary and lifestyle choices.
I love that. I love it when leaders in the field are still open, still seekers, still searching for new and better solutions. I really respect that a lot.
Well, as soon as someone tells you that they have the solution, leave them.
Very good.
They've got it wrong.
You did mention toxicity as potentially playing a role as well. We live in an environment that is becoming more and more toxic with pesticides like Roundup or glyphosate, which you mentioned, chemicals, heavy metals. Many people live in water-damaged buildings and get exposure to mold and mold toxins. So how important is that exploration? And beyond the diet, are there some specific things that you do for detoxification support?
There's electromagnetic fields, Wi-Fi, routers, wireless. What element does all of that have to play in it?
Yes.
So certainly that's a factor. The dietary program is designed to improve detox. I'm spending, we'll talk about saunas. We'll talk about mud baths. I am not a big supporter of chelation. You have to be very, very cautious about that. I'm not a big supporter of removing mercury from your teeth. That if you do that, you have to be very, very cautious about how that is done so you don't take it from your teeth to your brain. Mm-hmm. I am spending more time talking to people about turning off the routers at night and being very cautious about that. So
you're looking at someone who sleeps in a Faraday cage with silver-lined cloth every night exactly for that reason, to minimize the exposure to EMFs. And for me personally, in my own journey back from Lyme disease and mold from water-damaged buildings, and having explored neurologists looking at MS and all of those things, was never officially diagnosed with MS, but all of that was explored. And that EMF reduction was an important part of my own journey. So I'm excited to hear that you're also exploring that.
I think with the evidence for that continues to grow, and our resilience, as our resilience declines, our sensitivity to EMF, we become more sensitized to it, and the need to have deeper reduction grows.
Tell us about some of the research that you're doing today, how people can work with you if they want to explore your work further, and what are some of the study results that you can share with us?
So my papers, if people want to get access to my papers, you go to terrywahls.com/papers, and then you have give us your email and we can give you access to our papers. We've been able to show in progressive MS in a single-arm study that people could implement this complicated program, that half the folks had clinically meaningful improvement in gait, that we had remarkable reduction in fatigue, remarkable improvements in quality of life, remarkable improvements in mood, that is reduced anxiety, reduced depression, and remarkable improvements in verbal and nonverbal thinking. The next study that we did was a waitlist control in relapse-remitting MS that showed, again, remarkable improvement in quality of life and remarkable improvement in motor function, walking ability, and hand function.
Excellent.
The next study that we did was a small study of weightless control versus ketogenic diet versus Wahls diet. And again, we're able to show that improvement in quality of life, reduction in fatigue. So very satisfying there. The study that we're doing right now compares the low saturated fat diet, swank diet, to the Wahls diet. We will complete the study at the end of 2019. We'll analyze the data in 2020. And so I don't know what we're going to find there. We're writing more grants, and we'll let you know what will be coming next. We're looking at changes in visual function as well. And so we're pretty excited about what we're going to find there.
From everything that you know today, what are the top 3 things that listeners can do to make a shift in their health from a state of dis-ease toward optimal health?
Get rid of the sugar, get rid of the white flour, eat more vegetables.
Beautiful. That was easier than I thought it was going to be. So let's take the diet piece off the table, because we know you do amazing with the diet. So what are some of the other key things that you do on a daily basis in support of your own health?
Well, I spend an hour a day working out. I will also, I do a breathwork meditation in the morning. Upon getting up, I do another breathwork meditation at night just before going to bed. I will do cognitive training 3 times a week. I will do saunas 1 to 3 times a week. And I will swim twice a week. During spring, summer, and fall, I will bike to and from work. My wife takes my bike and puts it in timeout over the winter because she doesn't want me biking on ice.
Smart lady for sure. This has been so much fun. The highlight of my week. It's an honor to have you on the show. I was so excited when we were going to have the opportunity to connect. I appreciate all the research you're doing. I appreciate that you're making the role of diet and nutrition such a key part of people's consensus reality in this space. And so you are a hero in my mind. And I just thank you so much for being here today and appreciate everything that you do.
Oh, Scott, before you hang up, let me invite your listeners to check out our website, terrawalls.com, and think about coming to our seminar. We have hundreds of people come every summer, listen to me for 3 days, where we go over these concepts in details, and we practice some of the skills that I'm talking about. We practice resilience. And then the other thing that's really cool is we do basically a group functional medicine consult to help you understand the environmental factors that contributed to your illness, your lifetime exposures, and help you devise your intervention strategies.
Is that something that's open to the general public, or is that?
So this is open to the general public, and we also have a practitioner certification program with that. And we've just now added in a certification program that's online. And so I'll have another course in January online for health practitioners as well.
Beautiful. And I'll put some of those links in the show notes for people listening as well. I know at terrywalls.com/diet also has a lot of the information that we've talked about here as well.
Yes.
So again, thank you, Dr. Wahls. You are a very special lady, and I appreciate your time. And thank you so much for being here.
You're very welcome.
Thanks.
To learn more about today's guest, visit terrywalls.com. That's Terry, Terry, Wahls, WAHLS.com. terrywalls.com. Thanks for your interest in today's show. If you'd like to follow me on Facebook or Twitter, you can find me there as Better Health Guy. To support the show, please visit betterhealthguy.com/donate. If you'd like to be added to my newsletter, visit betterhealthguy.com/newsletters. And this and other shows can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify. Thanks for listening to this Better Health Guy blogcast with Scott, your Better Health Guy.
To check out additional shows and learn more about Scott's personal journey to better health, please visit betterhealthguy.com.